American Revolution is one of modern history's most famous wars. How 13 colonies defeated the world's greatest empire. In 1775, few people would have bet on the American colonies. Across the Atlantic stood Great Britain, the most powerful empire on earth. Its navy ruled the seas, its army was battle-tested, and its government controlled colonies spanning the globe. Opposing it were 13 scattered colonies with no national government, no professional army, and little money. Many American soldiers arrived carrying their own weapons, wearing mismatched clothing, and lacking basic supplies. Yet within 8 years, these colonists would accomplish what seemed impossible. They would defeat the British Empire and create a new nation. The Revolutionary War was not merely a fight over taxes or tea. It was a struggle that transformed ordinary farmers, merchants, laborers, and tradesmen into revolutionaries willing to risk everything for independence. The roots of the conflict stretched back years before the first shots were fired. Following the French and Indian War, Britain found itself burdened with enormous debt. To recover costs, Parliament imposed new taxes and regulations on the colonies. Measures such as the Stamp Act and Tea Act angered colonists who believed they were being taxed without representation. Tensions escalated throughout major colonial centers, particularly in Massachusetts. Boston became the heart of resistance. Events such as the Boston Massacre and the Boston Tea Party convinced many colonists that compromise with Britain was becoming impossible. What began as political disagreement slowly evolved into open rebellion. By 1775, both sides were preparing for war, though few could imagine how long and bloody the conflict would become. The Revolutionary War was not fought like a clean, organized conflict from a history book. It was chaotic, brutal, and terrifying for the people who lived through it. On the battlefield, soldiers faced smoke so thick they could barely see the enemy, cannon fire that shook the ground, and musket volleys that turned open fields into deadly zones within seconds. At battles like Battle of Monmouth in 1778, troops fought under extreme summer heat, with temperatures reportedly soaring near 100 degrees. Soldiers collapsed from exhaustion and dehydration as much as from enemy fire, and the intense heat became so dangerous that the battle became known for the suffering caused by the weather itself. Accounts describe men dropping their weapons, desperate for water, while artillery crews continued firing through the chaos. The conditions were so severe that legend claims a woman known as Molly Pitcher carried water to exhausted soldiers and took over operating a cannon after her husband was wounded, a story that became one of the most famous examples of civilian courage during the Revolution. The first shots of the Revolution rang out at battles of Lexington and Concord in April 1775. British troops marched from Boston to seize colonial military supplies stored in Concord. Colonial militias, warned by riders including Paul Revere, gathered along the route. At Lexington Green, a shot was fired, the famous shot heard around the world. To this day, historians still debate who fired first. What followed was chaos. As British troops retreated toward Boston, colonial militia forces attacked from behind trees, stone walls, and houses. The Americans avoided traditional battlefield tactics and instead used the terrain to their advantage. By the time the British returned to Boston, hundreds of soldiers had been killed or wounded. The war had begun. As fighting intensified, the colonies desperately needed leadership. They found it in George Washington. In June 1775, Washington was appointed commander of the Continental Army. He possessed military experience from the French and Indian War, but his greatest strength proved to be perseverance. Throughout the conflict, Washington faced shortages of food, weapons, uniforms, ammunition, and money. His army often appeared on the verge of collapse. Yet he understood something crucial: he did not need to destroy the British army. He simply needed to keep his own army alive long enough for Britain to lose the will to continue the war. This strategy of endurance would become one of the most important factors in the American victory. In fact, Washington lost more battles than he won during the war, yet his ability to preserve the Continental Army ultimately proved more important than any single battlefield victory. According to a popular legend, during the brutal winter at Valley Forge, Washington was seen kneeling in prayer in the snow, a story that, whether entirely true or not, became a powerful symbol of his determination and faith during the Revolution. One of the war's earliest major battles occurred at Battle of Bunker Hill. Although technically a British victory, the battle shocked British commanders. Colonial forces inflicted devastating casualties on the attacking redcoats. The famous command, "Don't fire until you see the whites of their eyes," may or may not have been spoken, but it reflected the reality that American soldiers conserved precious ammunition until the last possible moment. British officers suddenly realized that defeating the rebellion would be far more difficult than expected. The battle demonstrated that colonial fighters could stand their ground against professional soldiers, boosting American morale throughout the colonies. Some of the fiercest fighting came when armies met at close range, where discipline and courage mattered as much as weapons. At Battle of Guilford Courthouse in 1781, British troops under General Charles Cornwallis technically won the field, but the cost was devastating. The fighting was so intense that Cornwallis reportedly ordered his artillery to fire directly into the battle, even risking hitting his own men, because the lines were so tangled together. British soldiers advanced through forests, smoke, and musket fire while American forces used the terrain to slow them down. At Battle of Saratoga, soldiers fought through mud, exhaustion, and relentless attacks until British forces finally surrendered. These battles revealed the true nature of the revolution, not a quick uprising, but a long and painful struggle where ordinary people endured unimaginable conditions to decide the future of a new nation. In July 1776, while armies maneuvered across the colonies, political leaders took a step that changed history forever. The Continental Congress adopted the United States Declaration of Independence. Drafted primarily by Thomas Jefferson, the document formally severed ties with Britain. This transformed the conflict from a rebellion into a war for national independence. It also raised the stakes dramatically. If captured, many signers of the Declaration could be executed as traitors. There would be no easy path back to reconciliation. The famous image of the Declaration being signed immediately on July 4th is actually a popular misconception. The document was approved on July 4th, but many delegates signed it weeks later on August 2nd. According to a powerful Revolutionary-era legend, as the document was being created, Benjamin Franklin supposedly warned the delegates, "We must all hang together, or most assuredly we shall all hang separately," a statement that perfectly captured the danger they faced, even if the exact wording may have been polished over time. The year 1776 nearly brought disaster for the American cause. British forces captured New York City after a series of defeats that forced Washington's army into retreat. At times, the revolution appeared close to collapse. Then came one of the most famous moments in American military history. On Christmas night, Washington led his army across the icy Delaware River and launched a surprise attack against Hessian troops at Trenton, New Jersey. The victory was small in scale but enormous in psychological impact. Soldiers whose enlistments were about to expire chose to remain. The victory restored hope when it was needed most. Sometimes a war is not won by the largest battle, but by the battle that convinces people victory remains possible. A major turning point came in 1777 at the battles of Saratoga in New York. British General John Burgoyne attempted to isolate New England from the rest of the colonies. Instead, his army became trapped and was forced to surrender. The American victory stunned Europe. Most importantly, it convinced France that the Americans had a realistic chance of winning. France entered the war as an ally, providing money, weapons, soldiers, naval support, and military expertise. Without French assistance, American independence would have been far more difficult to achieve. Some historians argue that Saratoga was the single most important victory of the entire war because it transformed a colonial rebellion into an international conflict. The impact of Saratoga reached far beyond the battlefield. The surrender of Burgoyne's army damaged Britain's reputation and proved that the American forces were capable of defeating experienced European troops. France's decision to openly support the revolution changed the balance of power, and the French Navy later played a critical role in preventing British reinforcements from reaching American forces. Another fascinating detail is that the American victory at Saratoga was not the result of one single commander, but a combination of leaders including General Horatio Gates, General Benedict Arnold, and thousands of ordinary soldiers fighting through brutal conditions. Ironically, Benedict Arnold, who would later become America's most famous traitor, was considered one of the heroes of Saratoga after displaying extraordinary courage in battle. The victory also inspired Spain and the Dutch Republic to eventually oppose Britain, turning a colonial rebellion into a global war that stretched across oceans. Among the revolution's most fascinating figures was Marquis de Lafayette. Arriving from France as a young aristocrat, Lafayette became one of Washington's most trusted officers. He fought alongside American forces and helped strengthen ties between the United States and France. Another critical figure was Nathanael Greene, whose brilliant campaigns in the South exhausted British forces through maneuver warfare rather than direct confrontation. Greene repeatedly forced British armies to chase him across difficult terrain, slowly wearing them down. His strategy echoed Washington's broader approach: survive, adapt, and force Britain into a costly war of attrition. The winter at Valley Forge remains one of the most powerful symbols of the Revolution. During the winter of 1777 to 1778, thousands of soldiers endured freezing temperatures, disease, hunger, and inadequate shelter. Many lacked shoes, leaving bloody footprints in the snow. Yet despite these hardships, the army emerged stronger. Under the training of Baron von Steuben, American troops learned professional military tactics, battlefield formations, and discipline that transformed them into a true fighting force. Valley Forge became the place where the Continental Army evolved from a group of determined volunteers into a more organized military capable of challenging Britain's professional soldiers. One surprising fact is that the army at Valley Forge did not actually fight a major battle there. The real victory was survival, training, and unity during one of the darkest moments of the war. A famous Revolutionary War legend claims that George Washington was seen kneeling in prayer among the snowy trees of Valley Forge, a story that became a lasting symbol of his leadership and determination, even though historians debate whether the event happened exactly as described. The hardships of that winter created a bond among the soldiers that would help carry the revolution through the difficult years ahead. Just when Britain thought victory was within its grasp, the war took a deadly turn in the American South. As the war shifted southward, fierce fighting erupted across the Carolinas and Virginia. British commanders believed the South contained strong Loyalist support and hoped to regain control through a series of campaigns. Instead, they encountered determined resistance from Patriot militias and Continental forces. Battles such as Cowpens and Guilford Courthouse inflicted severe damage on British armies. Although the British sometimes won tactical victories, they suffered losses they could not easily replace. Every mile marched and every battle fought drained British resources while strengthening American resolve. At the Battle of Cowpens in 1781, American General Daniel Morgan used a clever double envelopment strategy that completely overwhelmed British forces, a maneuver still studied in military academies today. What made Cowpens so effective was Morgan's understanding of his troops. He placed militia units in stages, allowing them to fire and retreat while drawing the British deeper into a carefully prepared trap. The victory was especially damaging because the British commander, Lieutenant Colonel Bannister Tarleton, had built a reputation for aggressive victories, but Cowpens became one of his most embarrassing defeats and a major turning point in the Southern campaign. The war's decisive moment arrived in 1781 at Siege of Yorktown. British General Charles Cornwallis established his position at Yorktown, Virginia, expecting support from the Royal Navy. Instead, French naval forces blocked British rescue efforts while Washington and French commander Comte de Rochambeau surrounded the town. Trapped by land and sea, Cornwallis surrendered more than 8,000 troops. News of the defeat shocked Britain. Although minor fighting continued, Yorktown effectively ended the war. In 1783, the Treaty of Paris, 1783, formally recognized the independence of the United States. Meanwhile, Patriot militias in the South became so effective at hit-and-run attacks that British officers often found it impossible to distinguish friend from foe, turning the countryside into one of the most dangerous battlefields of the entire Revolution. The Revolution produced countless remarkable stories. Women served as spies, messengers, nurses, and supporters of the war effort. Enslaved Africans fought on both sides, often seeking freedom through military service. Native American nations faced difficult choices as they navigated a conflict that threatened their lands and futures. The war was not a simple struggle between Americans and British. It was a complex conflict involving diverse peoples, competing loyalties, and enormous sacrifices. By its conclusion, approximately 25,000 Americans had died, a staggering number relative to the population of the time. Behind the famous generals and battlefield victories were thousands of ordinary people who shaped the outcome of the war in ways history often overlooks. Spies became some of the most valuable weapons of the Revolution, with secret networks passing information through coded messages, invisible ink, and hidden documents. One of the most famous was the Culper spy ring, which operated around New York and secretly gathered intelligence for George Washington. Another surprising fact is that the Continental Army was not made up only of American-born colonists. Soldiers from Germany, France, Poland, and other parts of Europe fought alongside the revolutionaries. The war also involved privateers, privately owned ships authorized by the government to attack British vessels, and these sailors captured hundreds of enemy ships while weakening Britain's control of the seas. While armies fought on distant battlefields, the American Revolution transformed everyday life in towns, farms, and villages across the colonies. Communities that had once focused on trade, farming, and local politics suddenly had to adapt to a world shaped by war. Farmers became suppliers, turning crops, livestock, wool, and grain into essential resources for the Continental Army. Blacksmiths produced horseshoes, weapons parts, and tools, while women organized sewing circles to make uniforms, blankets, and clothing for soldiers. Many families opened their homes as temporary hospitals or shelters for wounded troops passing through their communities. In places like Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Massachusetts, civilians often found themselves living alongside marching armies, hearing cannon fire in the distance, and dealing with shortages caused by the demands of war. The war also created deep divisions inside communities. Neighbors who had once worked together sometimes became enemies as loyalists supported the British Crown while patriots fought for independence. Some towns experienced boycotts, property seizures, and even violence between opposing sides. Merchants had to navigate blockades and disrupted trade routes, while families struggled with rising prices and shortages of everyday goods like salt, sugar, and tea. Children grew up surrounded by the realities of war, watching soldiers march through their streets and hearing stories of battles fought nearby. Yet despite the uncertainty, many communities developed a powerful sense of shared purpose. The revolution was not only fought by generals and soldiers, it was sustained by ordinary people who adjusted, sacrificed, and kept the cause alive from their own homes. For years, Britain believed the rebellion could be crushed with enough troops, resources, and pressure. After all, this was the same empire that controlled vast territories, commanded the world's most powerful navy, and had defeated major European rivals. But as the war dragged on, British leaders began to realize that the conflict was becoming something they could no longer easily control. The colonies were not collapsing. Instead, the rebellion was spreading, foreign powers were joining the fight, and every victory came with a cost. British commanders found themselves fighting thousands of miles from home, relying on long supply lines across the Atlantic, while American forces could retreat, regroup, and continue the fight. The entry of France into the war in 1778 was a major turning point because Britain was no longer fighting a colonial uprising, it was now facing a global conflict against a European rival. British newspapers and politicians began questioning whether the war was worth the enormous financial and military burden. Some British officers privately admitted that defeating the Americans would require a level of commitment that the empire might not be willing to sustain. By the final years of the war, Britain still had powerful armies and won several battles, but the larger question had changed. Could Britain actually force millions of determined people to abandon their desire for independence? The answer became clear at Yorktown, where the surrender of Cornwallis proved that the American Revolution had become a war Britain could no longer afford to win. When the final shots of the Revolutionary War faded, the world witnessed something that many thought was impossible. A group of 13 colonies had challenged the greatest empire on earth and won. The victory was more than a military achievement, it was a transformation of an entire society. The people who had once been British colonists now saw themselves as citizens of a new nation, united by the idea that they could govern themselves and shape their own future. The revolution inspired a new sense of identity, independence, and possibility that spread across the continent. Towns that had endured shortages, battles, and uncertainty could finally celebrate the arrival of peace. Soldiers returned home, families reunited, and communities began rebuilding with a renewed belief in what they could accomplish together. The revolution was not won by one army alone, it was a massive effort involving soldiers, spies, sailors, farmers, merchants, and civilians all contributing to a cause that would change world history. When the guns finally fell silent, the world had changed. A collection of colonies had become a nation. Ideas about liberty, self-government, and individual rights would spread far beyond North America and inspire future revolutions across the globe. Against overwhelming odds, ordinary people challenged the greatest empire on earth and succeeded. The American Revolution remains one of history's most improbable victories, a story of courage, endurance, strategy, sacrifice, and the determination to pursue freedom no matter the cost. The creation of the United States became a symbol of change around the world, proving that powerful nations could be challenged and that ordinary people could influence the course of history. The American Revolution left behind a legacy of courage, sacrifice, and hope, a reminder that even against overwhelming odds, determination and unity can create something entirely new. If you enjoyed this journey through the American Revolution, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for more stories from the battles, leaders, and events that shaped the United States. Like and subscribe for more.